Hello, I'm Jamie Lynn Thomas, a certified herbalist and nutritionist, and I'm here on behalf of the Vital Potential doing our A to Z series. And today we'll be talking about bone broth, one of my favorite nutritional components to nourish and enliven the system, not only after convalescence or being ill, but as a way of life, especially here in the winter when the system is already working hard and needing nourishment. And in Colorado especially, it's dry, and the bone broth serves many purposes besides just the nutritional components. It serves to moisten the air and bring the aromatic herbs that I've put into the broth into the air as well, so that it helps with colds and flus and moving around of different bacteria and particles in the air. So, if you want to know very, very detailed directions and want handouts and reasons, scientific reasons why you would want to be using bone broth in this day and age, look to my next upcoming webinar where we go through step-by-step bone broth, and you get to see different recipes, and you'll get a resource list with all of my favorite suppliers for the herbs and bones in the local Colorado area, and as well as nationally. So I don't know about local meat sources for anybody else or local bone sources except for in Colorado. But if you do have questions, please put it in the comments list, and I will do what I can in my networking world to see if we can get you connected with some folks. So, why would you want to use a bone broth? And what exactly is a bone broth? Well, why do you want to use bone broth is all about the nutritional components of what's in bones. So let's think about it for a minute. So bones, what do most people think about when they think of bones? Calcium! I hear you women out there going, oh, my calcium! And our trace minerals also get put into our bone, as well as phosphorus, manganese, and in the middle of the bone, we have that fatty marrow area that has blood vessels, but mainly the yellow bone marrow, which contains lots and lots of nutritional components that can feed the animal for a long term. So this is our storehouse. This is the powerhouse of the body, where we put all of our nutritional resources. We store them in our bones. Not only are they stabilization and keeping us upright and moving around and protecting different organs, but it's for our purposes, this is the nutritional resource that we're looking for and that we're so happy to have. So, as a caveat, a nice warning here for all of you thinking ahead, why would you want to get organic, good quality bones when you're making your bone broth? Well, if it's the animal, the very base part of the animal is their bones, and all of their nutritional status is very, very clearly read within their bones, then we would want to have high quality bones, so that when we take that to nourish our body and our systems, that bone broth is wiggling its way in and nourishing each one of our cells with the nourishment of the animal. So it's a very beautiful way to take what our ancestors did as necessity to use every part of the animal that they could, and that they could also use what the bone marrow was fondly referred to as ASPIC, a very gelatinous substance that can become dried and utilized and preserved long term, where it has all of that delicious nutritional resource as well as fats suck into the gelatinous component, which then becomes hard and dried, somewhat like jerky. And that aspic served our Paleolithic ancestors in a very, very nice way, because when there were times of famine, times of low food status, times of low nutritional status, we were all able to continue to be fed and nourished through bone broths, which served as a base for all of our meats and stews and other dinners and lunches. But it also served as pulling out all of those resources, those mineral components that are really, really hard to get out anyway. They're not as easily extracted with water or fat as long-term extraction allowed. So this long-term bone broth extraction will create aspic and very delicious nourishment. So how long will it take to make a bone broth? Well, it depends what type of bone broth you're looking for and what type of book you've looked in. A lot of my grandmother's books talked about using a bone broth, taking a chicken and cutting it up and using the skeleton of the chicken, boiling it for only 20 minutes. Now, in my training, bone broth does not extract minerals in that time. Well, how can we when we cannot break down what the bone is to release what's within the bone? So long-term extraction is at least 24 to 48 hours, if not longer. There's been times I've left a boiling 5.5-gallon pot on the stove for 6 days straight and finally extracted all of the bones. So I started with the whole chicken, cut it up, got rid of, used the meat portion, and utilized the shell of the chicken itself, the top of the breast, the skeleton, and the ribs cage itself, and I put that into. I cooked it with all these other herbs, including anise, donqui, coriander, black pepper, white pepper, astragalus, and anything else that I have on hand that I thought would be delicious with the chicken. Basil's a nice one. Sages go really good in bone broth as well. And you cook it for a long, long time until the bone itself loses its structure and its rigidity, and it starts to turn into this gelatinous, kind of floppy bone. And that happens at about the 48-hour to 72-hour mark, where you're pulling out all of these constituents and all of these minerals, and you get rid of, essentially, the skeleton of that bone that you just used, which is very, very neat. And that was why our ancestors used bone broths to utilize every last little bit that they could. They were trying to get as much nourishment in times of feast and famine. So it went back and forth. Now, one of the really nice things about bone broth is that it takes about 10 to 15 minutes to prep it, and then you don't have to think about it until it's done to be strained, till it's ready to be strained, and then you can utilize it in all of your meals throughout the rest of the week. And being a nutritionist, this is something I highly recommend to a lot of my clients, especially if they're doing any type of detox program, any type of fasting, or they're convalescing from an illness. Now, one of my great mentors, Paul Berkner, talks about using the Vital Force from Nature Cure, Henley Lindlar, that you feed a cold, or you starve a cold and you feed a fever. So I always feed a fever with nourishment of bone broth. Not only is the heat going to be really soothing, serving to the system, but you have that diaphoretic action, which helps open the pores and release some of the fever, but it also nourishes the entire system with the minerals that have been extracted out of the bone broth. Very, very cool. And then as you start to come back into a regular diet, you can make things like congee, C-O-N-G-E-E, which is a traditional Chinese term for a type of porridge that's just using rice and herbs, powdered herbs more often than not, and a very rich bone broth to create like an oatmeal kind of substance, porridge-like substance, that the convalescing person can use and eat very slowly as they start to come back to vital health. This is part of my protocol whenever I get sick, and I include the bone broth in the rest of my diet from then on. We almost always have a big 5-gallon soup pot on the stove throughout the winter months, and it's very serving to our bodies and our systems. Now, once you do the bone broth, you strain it out. I tend to just gift those back to the earth, the bones and the herbs that have been left, and leave them out of way of the animals so that they don't get hold of those. And then I use the bone broth. I put it in mason jars and I preserve it. I stick it in my refrigerator and I use it with each of my meals when I'm cooking as a replacement for water. So if it calls for water and I'm looking to make a nourishing food that broth will be serving in, I add that to it. I've even used broth many, many times in my smoothies in the morning, adding it with blueberries and raspberries and strawberries and my kale. I use that broth instead of a water portion, and it ends up making it more nourishing to my system as I'm going through easier digestive processes. And the one caveat for bone broth that I have to tell you, which I mentioned at the beginning of this, was that aspic piece, that ASPIC, that gelatin-like component. And you'll know when you've made a really good bone broth, because the next morning after it's been cold in the refrigerator, you pull it out and oh my goodness, your broth looks like jelly or gelatin or jello, and it's all jiggly and brown and sometimes really dark and black depending upon what colors or what meats, what animal you've used to extract those particular mineral and nutritional components. Now, don't be alarmed. This is a good thing. Give yourself a pat on the back. You did it. You made a good bone broth. Now, you can continue to cook it down, so you can either reduce it by half. So what that means is if you have 4 cups of bone broth, and it's gel, so warm it up again, put it on the stove in a pan and warm it up, and you have 4 cups of that liquid bone broth. But you want to try what aspic and that aspic is that our Paleolithic ancestors used. Well, reduce it. Reduce it to about 2 cups. Sometimes you have to reduce to a little over half, so 1.5 cups out of 4. So you would really let that just evaporate out into the atmosphere, into your environment, and then you would cool it again. And you would let it stay in your refrigerator and cool. Or at this point, once I've cooled it and it turns to gelatin, I pull it out, and I've stuck it on a dehydrator before and used those little plastic trays that you can make fruit molds on, or little fruit roll-up kind of things. That's what you would stick your aspic on, and then you can dehydrate it and create jerky-like components of aspic. Now, if you don't want to go that far, but you still want to utilize the aspic, just warm it up. It's kind of like butter. It gets, well, it's a little more than butter. It loses its consistency at room temperature. So once it gets warm, it stops being gelatinous and it becomes liquid again. So then you just want to go ahead and utilize it in your recipes the same way. I've frozen these in ice cubes before, and then stuck them in a baggie and stuck them in my freezer. I've taken it and put it in mason jars, making sure to leave at least 2 inches, 2 inches, and I'm not kidding here. You're going to laugh at me, most of you canners, but 2 inches to expand, if not more. Sometimes you have to leave a little over 2 inches, about 3, so that when it expands, and the gelatin also expands, the mucilaginous components expand during the freezing process, that it's not going to blow up your mason jar. And trust me, I have done that a time or two. So, my name is Jamie Thomas, and I'm here with the Vital Potential, wishing you a happy bone broth experience. And if you have any questions, please contact us. I'm happy to let you know. And if not, look forward to the more detailed webinar that gives you recipes and directions and step-by-step pictures and resources for your local space. We're with the Vital Potential, and we'd like to help your spirit soar. Let that vitality rain shine. Have a beautiful